The world around us is hostile to the Word of God and to biblical values, but we are called to be salt and light, to stand for truth in a decaying culture. We are not called to run from the fire, but be willing to step into the fire. God has placed you at this time in history on purpose and for a purpose. Join us as we get better equipped to address civics and culture from a biblical worldview. Welcome to Into the Fire, powered by Dream City Church. Let's welcome our hosts Alison Furno and Debi Vandenboom.
Today's topic, Viewpoint Discrimination in School. We have a special guest, a fine arts coach and college student heading to Orlando, Florida, Abby Gandara. Thank you for being on the show today.
Hi, guys. Thank you for having me.
Yes, so this is going to be a really interesting story for our listeners. You have an amazing story of how you dealt with adversity in high school, not things that a lot of students, have gone through. And so many students would not be willing to do what you did, much less be willing to talk about it to inspire other people. So let's kind of start with that story because there's a lot to it. So what happened at your school?
Yeah, I think everything started the summer before my freshman year of high school. I went to our National Fine Arts Youth Convention, and they were talking a lot about Christian clubs and just like having one on your campus at your school and really like creating that safe place for Christian students to just share the gospel. And I remember feeling like super inspired, and I wanted to take that back to my high school going into my freshman year and kind of facilitate that. And so going into my freshman year, me and two friends, we had kind of said that we were going to do this Christian club. And then we ended up getting told by admin that we were not allowed to have a Christian club. And there were a lot of meetings, a lot of different conversations that had happened. But in the end, admin kind of said, well, we're a charter school, so we have bylaws. And one of the bylaws is you can't have a religious club or a Christian club on campus, which was really ironic of them to say because at that time there was a yoga and meditation club on campus as well as an LGBTQ plus support group on campus. So it was our club specifically that they had said no to. And so right as they were like saying no to all this, we were kind of just like, okay, like we can't have a Christian club, like we're not allowed to have it. COVID had happened, and so we stayed shut down for the rest of my 9th grade year, all of my 10th grade year. There were no clubs, no sports. Going into my junior year, I think is really when I was like, okay, now there's clubs again, now there's sports, and the person on administration who had said no to the Christian club previously ended up leaving. And so I was like, okay, maybe now we'll be able to make this happen. But I also knew like a lot of the student body at that time was not Christian. And so I kind of knew I needed to start small and just start inviting people to church and bringing people into the house of God. And then our junior year, I think I had a group of, I want to say like 15 to 20 youth students coming to our youth group consecutively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just want to interrupt 1 second because you were right before that, like in your freshman, I remember that you were regularly bringing especially girls to church, right? A lot of the people from school, and you'd introduce them to us and get them plugged in, and they were coming to church, these kids from your school.
I think we even had like one or two of them our senior year end up even doing like our fine arts program, our celebration of Christmas program. So it definitely was a continual change that we got to see. Like they didn't just come to youth group once or twice, like they were coming on a regular basis. I think we had like 7 or 8 of them come to our summer youth camp. So it was a really amazing culture shift that was starting to happen. And so our junior year as well, I was in a history class at my high school. We were doing AP US history, and a lot of that focuses on current politics that are happening. So like Roe versus Wade was like a part of the curriculum. And this was also the time of year, my junior year, when Dobbs versus Jackson was really coming up in the Supreme Court. I think May of my junior year, Dobbs made their case at the Supreme Court, or Jackson, or they made their case there. And so it was like a big conversation in my history class my junior year of like, is abortion okay? And I was like, no, it's not okay. And I think I was probably one of 2 students in a class of, I want to say 16 or 18 students who felt that way. And so it would be me against 15 or 16 kids having this debate on like a regular basis of, is this morally okay? And so going into my senior year of high school, I decided that this was something that I was going to stand on, and I wasn't going to just kind of not say anything about this topic. And so our school encourages us, our freshman to our senior year, to kind of be building a senior project, but we mostly work on it our senior year. And I decided that for my senior project, I wanted to focus on pro-life advocacy and what that looks like and how we can promote a culture of life and why abortion is wrong in our culture. And so that's kind of where everything started, was that senior project. And then my senior year as well, we were able to really get that on-campus Christian club started. And so that also started taking off my senior year. And so that's kind of where all of this started happening, was just from all that.
Yeah.
So you had to fight for 3 years to get that
it took
Christian
3
club.
years
That
for
is
the Christian
crazy.
club.
Yeah.
But you were
So-
faithful in that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what okay, so the first time you tried to do it was your freshman year. How did they tell you no? Was it an email? Did they tell you in person?
So there's like a form that you would fill out in the front office if you wanted any kind of club. We submitted the form and then didn't hear anything. And so we were like, okay, like that's a little weird, because normally they say something or like email you back or anything like that. And so then my parents and me received an email from the administrator at the school who said no. And she was like, the Christian club, like, we need to meet about it. And so me and my parents went in for a meeting, and she basically was just like, you're not allowed to have this club. And she had said that part of the reason we weren't allowed to have it is because we had wanted to work with Youth Alive Arizona. And she's like, there can't be any clubs with outside organizations.
That's interesting, because you would think, I mean, it sounds like she didn't want it documented.
Right.
That
Yes.
she's like, let's meet in person.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
She also didn't send that email to my school email. She emailed my personal email.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So she did not want to document it that you can't have a Christian
Yes.
club on campus, because that wouldn't stand. That's kind of crazy.
Yeah, we ended up having like a second meeting with Christian Chambliss as well, who at that time was the director of Youth Alive AZ. And he had come in and was like, well, here's like all the laws. Like he like printed them out. And she was like, those basically don't matter because we're a charter school and we're allowed to say in our bylaws, even though we're a public school that receives state funding, in our bylaws, it says that you're not allowed to have this specific club, which again, at that time, there was an LGBTQ plus support club on campus, as well as a yoga and meditation club on campus. So it was really only the Christian club that was being said no to. And she was like, well, the yoga and meditation club isn't a religious club, which we know as Christians is not true. And she had also said that the LGBTQ plus support club was the result of another student's senior project. And so she was like, well, when you're a senior, you can have a Christian club, but it can only be around for the year that you're a senior. And after that, it can't be a thing.
You're like, oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's and so just for some context for people who don't know, Youth Alive is the Assemblies of God
Yes.
program of having Christian clubs in school, and so
Yeah.
that was what they had presented that year, because I was there with you at Nationals for
Yeah.
Fine Arts, and they had presented this Youth Alive, and that it's a great program, and they have support, right? So the Arizona AG would have support through that.
And they would give us like curriculum as well.
And
Yeah.
stuff, right? And so you'd have somebody that would be support, but that was what they claimed, whether
Yes.
that's reality or not. But I mean, because it sounds like they were kind of coming up with
And
excuses.
if I'm remembering correctly, the LGBTQ plus support club also was working with an outside organization.
right,
So it was
like Glisten
like,
or
I think it was Bloom was the
Okay.
organization. I'm pretty sure.
But what I like about this too is like you didn't even emphasize this because you weren't even thinking about it, but like you got told no, you can't promote this type of thing on campus, right? So like in my head, a normal person would be like, okay, I'm not allowed to do this. I'm not allowed to talk about it, whatever. And you were like, oh yeah, meanwhile, I'm bringing all these people to youth.
Yes.
Like, so you were like,
Yeah.
okay, if I can't do this, I'm going to figure out other ways. I'm going to do other things. Maybe that was conscious or subconscious. I don't know. But that's amazing. You're just like, oh, I'm going to bring you to church.
Yeah.
I'm going to start figuring out. So like,
you can't bring church to school. We'll
Right.
bring school. We'll bring
Oh, yeah.
school to church.
Yeah,
right? That's-
absolutely.
yeah.
so were you talking to some students who had never been to church? I mean, what was that?
I want to say the entire demographic of kids I was bringing was kids who had no exposure to God or church at all.
So how did you start that conversation?
It started with one person. I brought her to church, I want to say May of my sophomore year. She ended up getting saved and accepting Christ that May, like I think at our youth service actually with Pastor Ash, which is amazing. And she was part of a really big friend group of girls at our school who we were all in dance classes together, and they all would hang out on weekends and I would hang out with them. And me and her would start going, and we kind of made it like the thing like, oh, we're going to church tonight. Like, does anyone want to come with us? And then one of our friends started going, and then it was like, okay, well, if all three of them are going, then let's just bring our whole friend group, like, because we'll all get to hang out and like it'll just be fun. Like everybody just kind of started going because a friend was going or a boyfriend was going or a girlfriend was going. And so that's kind of how we started getting like that big group of people to start going. And so I think by the end of my junior year of high school, there was like 10 or 15 kids that on a regular basis were pulling up. And then going into the fall of my senior year, there was a Bonfuego, and one of those girls spoke at the Bonfuego, which is like our student preaching night for the youth group. And it was just so cool to see like somebody who wasn't a Christian a year prior, like 6 months or over a year later, was like speaking at this youth group event, and like our whole friend group and like group of people that we bring in church was there. And like it was just so incredible to see, like it started with one person, but now we had like this big group of people coming. And I think that's where like at that point I was like, okay, now there's really a need for an on-campus Christian club. Like now is the time where we have the kids that want to be in it and the kids that want to be a part of it. And there was also a lot of underclassmen that I think, because we were also outspoken about going to church our junior year, there was a lot of underclassmen that at that point were like, oh, I'm a Christian too. I didn't know you were a Christian. Like, I've never spoken about this before, but you all posted a Bible verse on your story, or you all reposted a church post with an American flag. Like, I didn't know there were other Republicans at the school. I didn't know that there were other conservative students here. And so, like, it just kind of started to grow. And I think that's where I really saw, like, now is the time to start this. Now is the time to have this space for our students. So,
yeah, that's awesome. And it's just that not being afraid to just, because I mean, I know a lot of people have talked about that, like, oh, well, you know, they say it all the time in church, invite somebody to go to church.
Yeah.
And like sometimes it's kind of awkward. Like it's like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? You're just like, who do I ask?
I was told no so many times.
Really?
I was told no, I think like I want to say upwards of 20 times by the same girl. But then she ended up coming to church with me at the end of my senior year and getting baptized that August.
That is so
like,
cool.
But it's so scary. Like, because sometimes they say no and you're like, oh, like,
yeah,
that was hurtful. Like,
yeah, like
that
I feel
sucks.
bad.
But then like, you just have to keep planting the seed, and then the Lord does what he does and waters it within their hearts. But like,
right.
it's so scary to plant that seed, but then you just give it to the Lord and he does something with it. But it is scary, but you have to do it. Like, that's what we're called to do, you know?
And you were in an environment where you're not only a minority, but it was a hostile environment where they were out actively trying to prevent you from having this club.
Yeah, right? No, absolutely.
Yeah.
So then let's kind of fast forward to, you were talking about, I think you said it was maybe your junior year with the pro-life argument in your classroom. So when you were talking about this, like it's scary to me thinking of being in high school. When I was in high school, I wouldn't have stood up for anything. I didn't know enough, you know what I mean? And I was a Christian, but it played in my head like, this is why anybody that's listening, whether you're in middle school, high school, or you're 60 years old, like, learn why you believe what you believe so you can defend it, right? And that's the thing. I know that now, but you know what I mean? It's one of those things where until you realize, like, this is important, I need to know why. It really,
And so you already had those strong pro-life views, right? And how did that develop? Like, how did you get that? Because you wouldn't have spoken up in your history class if you didn't already feel like you kind of knew what you were talking about and had that.
My mom always had kind of really instilled really strong values in us from the time that we were really little on, like about being pro-life and those types of things. And so I like knew abortion was wrong my whole life. And then I want to say I was 14 and a friend of mine told me she had an abortion. And I think it like rocked my world because I was 14 and she was like, I want to say 15 or 16. So I was like, wow, like, this is so much closer to home than I ever realized. Like, this is something that people my age are not being educated on. And she had no idea, like, when she had an abortion, I think, like, what it really was. Like, I think it was just something that was being taken care of. And so I was like, that's not what that is. Like, she had no idea. And I think that was a moment that I was like, okay, this is something that is not being talked about. Like, the kids that I'm growing up with, like, in my generation have no idea what abortion actually is. We're just being told it's medical care in school. We're being told it's medical care on our social medias. We're being told, like, on our TikToks that it's no big deal and that it's normalized and that, like, I see these TikToks that it's like, come have an abortion with me. Like, it's like, crazy. It's like, whoa, you have no idea what that is. Like, there's such a lack of what it is, like, being taught. And so I think from that point on, I really started to have this passion growing, but I had no idea what to do with it. And then your daughter, Eden, we had kind of talked about it, and she was like, well, there's this March for Life happening this weekend. And it was my freshman year of high school, and she's like, and you should really come with me to this March for Life. And so we went to the March for Life, and I started talking to you about what this is, and you gave me like all this information, and I was like, wow, like we really can do something about this. We really can start to speak up and learn more about this and like tell people about this topic and be passionate. And like I think you took me down to the Capitol that year also, and I like saw firsthand like the legislation as it was happening and like what it looks like. And so this like fire just started to burn in me of like, this topic is really something the Lord has given me so much passion to speak out on because it's so real and I see it so much. And so yeah, that's kind of where that like started. And I think that's ultimately what fueled a lot of those conversations like my junior year of high school and in our history class of like, this is a really real thing that's happening. And I was being told like, well, it's not even alive. And I was like, no, that's not factually true. And like, we're reading over like the packet on Roe versus Wade, where it's like, it was a law about women's privacy. And I'm like, no, like that is not true. Like, yeah. So it was just, it fueled from all of that though.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you're talking about like, you're in this classroom setting and you already knew what you believed about it. But not only that, based on everything you're saying, you were not expecting everybody to agree with you.
Yeah.
And that's like your expectations of, especially when you're in middle school and high school, most students, their number one goal is to fit in.
Yeah.
Right? They want to feel normal. They want to fit in. They want to be liked by people. That's like a huge, gap that we always see with students. And so it's like setting the expectations. I'm not here to fit in. My value isn't in other people. You already know what your value is in. So you're able to stand up and say, hey, this is wrong, even if everybody else is against you, because you're like, I already know the truth. Yeah. And that's amazing. So how did you feel when that group of people disagreed with you? Did it like stress you out at all, or what were you thinking?
I think at the moment it just felt like an uphill climb. Like I would say something and then was immediately shot down with stuff that like wasn't even factually correct. And it was hard because it's like, these are truths that these people truly believe are the truth. Like these are facts that these people are like, this has been scientifically proven. And it
was
like,
the teacher too.
Yes. Yeah. And it was like, that's not true. And like, and it's hard too, because you're talking about a group of students that not only doesn't believe in God, but has no exposure to him and doesn't believe that he exists and is real. And so like, I couldn't use arguments like, well, God created life in the womb. I couldn't use those things talking to this group of students. Like, obviously we know that that's true. But that wasn't the conversation that I was able to have. I was like, well, scientifically, somebody looked in the womb and heard a heartbeat after 28 days of conception, like, so, and things like that, that I was like, using. But even then it was so hard because it was like, well, what do you think about like women who have been raped, or what do you think about like incest? And it's like, but it was like, then I had to like use statistics of like, well, that is less than this % of things, and like this is the number of abortions that are happening in America, and this is the actual number of things that have stemmed from rape. And like, but it was such a hard argument to have and like such a tough conversation to have because like it was so intense. And like at the end of the class, once the bell rang, like that was it. Like, and no matter what I said, it felt like it was never going to change a mind. And it felt like I was never going to be able to convince anyone that this is actually the truth and this is actually something that is happening,
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when it comes to, you were talking about culture and stuff, when it comes to culture, how have we seen culture shift around these issues, and what celebrities have we seen come out and change their minds?
Oh, I mean, I don't know what celebrities that I've seen like change their mind, but I will say I think the amount of celebrities that have had babies in the past couple years, like I think when Rihanna performed at the Super Bowl pregnant, I think that was like such a big like, oh wow, like women can still have their careers and have babies. And I think that is something that like we're seeing shifting more and more, is like all these celebrities that have kind of grown up with us are like now having kids and having babies. And you're like, this is such a win for the pro-life movement because they're still doing their thing. Like they're still on stage at concerts. Like you have like Meghan Trainor who has like 2 kids and is going on tour. Like you see all these celebrities that are like now having kids and they're still doing their thing. And it's like, well, for years we were told like, well, women can't do both. Like you want to be a star, you can't have a kid. But now we're seeing that that is not true. And I think that is something that has been a very big cultural shift of like, you can still go to school and get married and have kids. Like you can still do things like be on a podcast, and you can still do things like speak out about what you believe in and have kids. Like those are not limitations that I think like are kind of starting to lift. Like I've really seen that. Like that's the biggest shift that I've noticed.
Yeah, for sure. And politically, we see a lot of people that are changing their minds just overall that have always been on one side, and they're like, wait a second, I'm starting to wake up to all of this stuff, you know?
It seems like a lot of your age too, like the younger generation. And I don't know whether that's because there's so much more, you know, available online where you can see what an abortion is. You can see what a baby looks like at 6 weeks or whatever. And even just some of the new things where you can tell what gender the baby is.
Well, and I do have to give credit to like a lot of these pro-life like organizations, because they've really stepped up their social media game. And that I think is where like some of the biggest fights are happening is online and on social media, because something that the left does unfortunately really, 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 really well is their social media. Yeah. Like their pages look amazing. Their aesthetics are great. And I'm like, this sucks, because ours didn't until really recently. And now we're kind of shifting that, and now I'm seeing all these like right-wing conservative pages look really good, and all these like Students for Life is like color coordinated, and I'm like, this is great. Like this is where we're gonna start really gaining that attention on social media, and so it's really good.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I totally agree. So I want to go now to your senior project. So we went through the rest of your time at school, but now we get to your senior year, your senior project. What you talked about, how it was about the pro-life movement. So what was that about, and how did it go?
Yeah. So, like I said, our school encourages us to do a topic that we're passionate about. And the goal of our senior project is to, like spread information and promote awareness, and also show what you're doing to make a difference, within that. And so, I kind of partnered with Dream Life for my senior project, because they encourage you to partner with outside organizations for your senior project and really connect with a lot of people. And so...
And just Dream Life is a pro-life organization at Dream City Church that I oversee. So just for context, because people may not know what that is.
It's really great. You should all check it out. So going into my senior project, I was like, I really want to focus my project on what it is to promote a culture of life and why is it important. Like those I think were the two big things that I really wanted to hammer home on, is like, here's all the things that we can do to promote a culture of life, and here's all the ways that we're spreading awareness. But in partnership with that, like, here's why it's so important. Here is what abortion is. Like, this is something that I think, especially when we're talking about high school students, a lot of them don't know what abortion is. A lot of them have very little education on it. They just think it's a part of contraceptive care, or they think it's a part of medical care or women's health, and it's so not. And we know that. But I just knew, like, a part of our senior project, for context, is that we have to present it to the board at our school and the whole senior class. And so I knew my audience was going to be 17 and 8-year-olds who had very little context on what abortion was and why it was something that I was so passionate about seeing come to an end in my lifetime.
And this is a big part of your grade, right? This is a big deal.
It basically was the big determining factor of whether or not we graduated. So no pressure, right? But it is a really big thing at our school, our senior projects.
Did they give you a hard time about choosing that topic?
Not with choosing the topic. I think that was the thing that they were kind of just like, okay, like that's your topic. That's what you're choosing.
Whatever you want.
Yeah. Okay. So that was like something that I was able to choose it and do that. And I think there were other projects, for context, that were also about political topics. Like there were other projects that were presented that were like about like supporting certain groups of people, or about like immigration. So like my project was not the only one of its kind, but I think it was the only one of its viewpoint.
Yeah. Right.
So
you're doing the presentation. There's a board there. There's a whole class. Or how many students do you think?
50.
50?
Okay.
50.
I think 52 was our senior class.
Okay. So there's 50 students, a board of people watching you. How does the presentation go?
So I was giving my presentation, and at the beginning of my presentation, I did state, like, you know, I know that 1 in 4 women have had abortions. Like that statistic is true in and out of high schools, in and out of the church. We know that is just, you know, the world that we're living in. And I was like, if this presentation you feel is going to bring up anything that is negative, or you just are really not in a place to hear it, I absolutely understand that. I also have resources for you. Like I have support groups for you if you want to talk about it. Like there is resources out there for you. Like, no, you're not judged at all by this presentation. Know that you're not being called out at all by this presentation. Like, you are met with the most love and grace and understanding. Like, and I understand if you need to leave now. And nobody got up and nobody left. And so I was like, okay, we're all staying. Like, buckle in, guys. This is where it gets good. And so, you know, I was giving my presentation, and as I was giving my presentation, I got to a slide that I'd kind of been like, again, talking about like the why is it important that we're having this conversation about abortion? Like, why am I so passionate about it? And I was like, I'd really kind of thought about it and I'd really prayed on it. And I felt like the best way to communicate to a group of 17 and 18-year-olds who have no context for what abortion is, the best way to communicate to them was to show them what abortion was. And I went to live action, and I think that they were more like mild pictures from live action. If you follow live action, you know that sometimes they post stuff that's like, wow, I don't want my 5-year-old seeing that, you know? Right. But I picked like the pictures of like the baby feet and like the things like that, like to really show you like these are people. Yeah. Like these are little humans whose life has been taken from them. Right. And I was like, this is what abortion is. Like, there is no other way to paint this. This is not medical care. This is the person that abortion is hurting. And so I continued on with my presentation, and I think that point was the point that people were like, they started to get uncomfortable because they were like, wow, like this is real, like this. And I think that's kind of where I saw like the wheels start turning for some people. I think that's the point where I saw a lot of students be like, wow, like maybe I have been thinking about this wrong. But that was also the point where I saw one by one as students started to walk out. And I was like, okay, that's really, really odd. Like some people,
no one does that, right?
No one really does that. Like, people will get up to go to the bathroom every now and again, but like it was like 5 or 6 people. And so I'm watching as like they get up and they walk to like this little corner, and I'm like, what is going on? Like, people were getting up and like walking, and it was mostly girls. And I think they all kind of just like walked out, and I was like, okay, like I'm not going to think anything of it. And so later on, you know, we've done our presentations. We were finishing up for the day, and I think one of my teachers actually had come up to me, and she was just like, hey, like, did you see how many people walked out of your presentation? And I was like, yeah, that was really weird. Like, no one has ever done that before to any of the presentations, like, as far as I know. And she was like, she had told me, she was like, well, they asked permission from admin to walk out of the presentation, and admin told them if they needed to that they could. And like there was an option for them to walk out of the presentation.
Oh my gosh.
So I think at that point my jaw was on the ground, because I was like, a big part of our school was like professionalism. And that was a really big point that they had like really hammered into us from our freshman year, was we're training you to be young professionals. We're training you to go into the workplace and be professional. I'm like, you as an administration had the opportunity to teach a group of young people that are about to go out into the world for the first time how to be professional when somebody's talking about something that they don't agree with. And instead of doing that, you were like, no, if you need to walk out, you can walk out.
Right.
And you had to sit through things that you didn't agree with.
Yes, absolutely. There were presentations that I didn't agree with, that I was like, I'm going to sit through this and be respectful, because this person has clearly put a lot of work and a lot of hours into their presentation. And it's a 10 to 15 minute business presentation. And that is nerve wracking for some people. You know,
work on it all year.
Yes. And so you want to be respectful. You want to be professional. Even if you don't agree with what's being discussed, there's no reason to walk out of a presentation. So to me, it felt like very much like, okay, like,
it was disrespectful.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, you know, even if people do disagree with you, they remember what you said. They remember the topic. And I think that's worth it just to get a new perspective, right?
Absolutely.
It's always worth it. So I have our last question here, because this is, I mean, it's a great story and how you persevered through all of this stuff. But what advice would you give to someone who is in their school, who wants to make a move for truth, but doesn't know how to start?
I would say I know it is scary, but it is something that we, as young people, as people in school, we have to do it, because otherwise no one else will. I think the biggest thing that I learned in high school is that if I hadn't done it, no one else would have. There would have been so many people who wouldn't have gotten saved, so many people who wouldn't have ever even heard about Jesus or talked about what it is to be pro-life had it not been for me speaking out. And I would say, I know it is so scary, but don't assume that someone else is going to speak out on it if you don't. Like, you may really truly be the only chance that people have to hear a different perspective, to hear about who Jesus is. And I would say start small. If it's really scary, it is. Start small. Start with one person. Start with your friend group. And sometimes that's the scariest for some people, right? Is to talk to their friends at school about who Jesus is. But I would say know that we're doing it for something so much bigger than ourselves. We're doing it for ultimately salvation. That's why we do what we do. That's why everything that I did in high school was done, because I knew the cards on the table and how important that they were. And so again, I would just say start as small as you want to, but then let the Lord do what he does and let him really step in and grow those little seeds and just plant them in your friend group. Like, again, start so small, and then he will take that and he will run with it. And just give him your yes. Because one thing that I have really learned in this past year is that he will always honor your yes. And so if you just give him that yes, then he will take that and he will do things with it that you could have never imagined.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that you did too, which may help other people, is you had a lot of adults around you that you relied on, right?
Yeah.
That you went to for advice, that you went to for help and support, and a whole wide variety of adults in your life, right? At church, at home, even just within your life, right?
Yeah.
That you had, because I remember when you were walking through this, that you would talk to adults in your life that you could trust and get advice on these different things, and to pray for you and to support you.
I don't think I could have done it without like the prayer that I had backing me. Like, really, truly, like I always would tell my friends when they were coming to youth group, like, you have no idea, like, before you even walk in these doors, there are people who have prayed for this. Like, there are people who have been praying for what's about to happen.
Yeah.
Like, it made such a difference. And I would say, like, if you're a young person watching this, like, find that community, find 2 or 3 adults that you can really lean on. If you're a young person that's passionate about being pro-life, like, if your church has a life ministry, or there's an adult there that's passionate about it, or a pastor that's passionate about it, talk to them about it. Like,
center,
yes, absolutely. Like, there's so many people out there that I really think want to pour into this next generation. They're just looking for people that are willing to be poured into,
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great advice. And Abby, thank you so much for coming on the show today. And thank you for listening to Into the Fire, powered by Dream City Church.
You can listen to this podcast on Apple and Spotify and follow us on social media. Find all the info on the show notes. To learn more about Dream City Church, visit our website at dreamcitychurch.us. Thanks for listening.